In the basement of Morrison Auto Repair in downtown Cleveland, a man with calloused hands and oil-stained coveralls was performing what looked like routine maintenance on a 2018 Honda Civic. But if you watched closely, really closely, you'd notice something strange. His movements were too precise, too controlled. The way he cleared corners wasn't the casual shuffle of a mechanic heading to grab tools. It was the tactical movement of someone trained to survive in the world's most dangerous places. For 6 years, Marcus Thompson had been the most overqualified auto mechanic in Ohio, and nobody suspected a thing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Thompson arrived at Morrison Auto Repair every morning at exactly 6:23 a.m., 17 minutes before the shop officially opened. At 34, he had the weathered hands of someone who'd spent years working with machinery, but there was something different about the scars on his knuckles. They weren't from wrenches slipping or knuckles scraping against engine blocks. They were from a different kind of work entirely. The other mechanics at Morrison's had long since stopped questioning Marcus's unusual habits. Why did he always park his beat-up Ford pickup in the same spot, backed into the space with a clear view of both entrances? Why did he methodically check every tool in his kit each morning, even though he'd done the same thing the day before? Why did his eyes constantly scan the shop like he was cataloging every person, every movement, every potential threat? "Thompson's just weird," Danny Rodriguez would tell new employees. Danny was the shop foreman, a 28-year veteran who'd seen every type of mechanic come through Morrison's doors. Good with engines, keeps to himself, never causes trouble. Just don't expect much conversation. What Danny didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus Thompson had once been Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, Delta Force Operator, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. For 8 years, he'd been part of the most elite fighting force in the American military, conducting operations in places that didn't officially exist against enemies whose names were classified above his current pay grade. The transition to civilian life had been jarring. After his discharge, Marcus had drifted through several jobs: security work that felt like playing dress-up, corporate consulting that made him feel like a fraud, construction work that was honest but left his mind too idle. It was his older brother Jake who'd suggested the auto repair shop. "You always were good with machines," Jake had said, "and Morrison's is always looking for reliable help." What Jake didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't just good with machines. He was exceptional. During his military service, he'd cross-trained as a vehicle specialist, learning to repair, modify, and weaponize everything from Humvees to motorcycles to captured enemy vehicles. He could diagnose engine problems by sound alone, rebuild a transmission blindfolded, and improvise repairs using materials that would make factory-trained technicians weep. But at Morrison's, Marcus deliberately worked at the pace of an average mechanic. He finished jobs on time, not early. He solved problems efficiently, not brilliantly. He learned to hide his capabilities behind a facade of blue-collar competence. The other mechanics respected his work but never suspected its true quality. When Marcus rebuilt an engine, it didn't just run better. It ran perfectly, with tolerances that exceeded factory specifications. When he diagnosed electrical problems, he didn't just find the obvious faults. He identified every potential failure point in the system and quietly fixed them all. His repair work was so thorough that customers' cars often ran better than they had when new. "Marcus has the magic touch," Sarah Chen, the shop's office manager, would tell customers when they asked about the quiet mechanic who'd worked on their car. Sarah was one of the few people at Morrison's who tried to get to know Marcus personally, but she'd learned not to push too hard. He was polite, but private, helpful, but distant. What Sarah couldn't have known was that Marcus's magic touch came from years of field maintenance under combat conditions, where an improperly repaired vehicle could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. In Afghanistan and Iraq, Marcus had learned to listen to engines like a physician listening to heartbeats, to feel vibrations that revealed stress fractures before they became fatal failures, to improvise solutions using materials scavenged from destroyed equipment. The physical demands of Delta Force training had left Marcus with capabilities that seemed almost supernatural to civilians. His reflexes were honed to respond to threats in milliseconds. His spatial awareness allowed him to work in cramped engine compartments without looking. his hands finding components by touch alone. His diagnostic skills had been sharpened by situations where a vehicle failure could leave a team stranded in hostile territory. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus had learned the art of invisibility. In special operations, the most successful operators were often the ones who could blend seamlessly into any environment. At Morrison's, Marcus was the gray man, present but unremarkable, competent but not extraordinary, friendly enough to avoid suspicion, but quiet enough to avoid attention. Every morning, Marcus would perform his ritual inspection of the shop. To his coworkers, it looked like he was simply organizing his workspace. In reality, he was conducting a tactical assessment. He noted which vehicles had arrived overnight, which customers seemed nervous or evasive, which delivery drivers lingered too long in the waiting area. Old habits from a life where situational awareness was the difference between coming home and being shipped home in a flag-draped coffin. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his new life was built on deception. For 6 years, he'd been lying to everyone around him about who he really was. Not through false documents or elaborate cover stories, but through the simple act of allowing people to see only what they expected to see. A competent mechanic. A quiet guy who kept to himself. A man with no remarkable history and no dangerous capabilities. During lunch breaks, while other mechanics discussed sports or complained about their wives, Marcus would sit in his truck and read technical manuals, mostly not just automotive, but electrical systems, structural engineering, chemical processes. Learning had become a compulsion during his military service, driven by the understanding that knowledge could save lives. The habit had persisted into civilian life, even though the stakes were now considerably lower. Sometimes, late at night when the shop was closed, Marcus would find himself mentally planning defensive positions throughout Morrison's. Where would he position shooters to cover all approaches? Which walls would provide adequate cover from small arms fire? What materials in the shop could be improvised into weapons or barricades? It was an automatic response, his tactical mind refusing to fully shut down even in the safety of civilian life. The closest Marcus had come to revealing his true capabilities was 3 years earlier, when a customer's teenage son had suffered a severe allergic reaction in the waiting room. While everyone else panicked, Marcus had calmly administered first aid with the precision of a combat medic, keeping the boy stable until paramedics arrived. Later, when Sarah asked where he'd learned such advanced medical techniques, Marcus had simply said he'd taken a first aid course at the community college. It was a small lie in service of a larger deception, but it illustrated the constant vigilance required to maintain his cover. Every skill he demonstrated, every capability he revealed, had to be explainable within the context of his assumed identity. He was just a mechanic who'd happened to learn a few extra skills along the way. The transformation from elite special operations soldier to small-town auto mechanic had required more than just changing jobs. It had required changing his entire sense of identity. For 8 years, Marcus had been defined by his elite status, his specialized training, his membership in one of the military's most exclusive fraternities. At Morrison's, he was defined by his ability to fix brake pads and change oil filters. But in the quiet moments between jobs, when Marcus was alone with an engine in his thoughts, he sometimes wondered if he was wasting his talents. He'd been trained to protect American interests around the world, to neutralize threats that kept ordinary citizens safe in their beds at night. Instead, he was helping suburban families keep their minivans running smoothly. The answer always came back to the same place. He'd served his time in the darkness, and now he'd chosen the light. Morrison's Auto Repair represented normalcy, stability, the civilian life he'd fought to protect. If that meant hiding his true capabilities behind coveralls and a time clock, so be it. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his carefully constructed new life was about to collide with his violent past in ways he'd never imagined. The skills he'd worked so hard to bury were about to become the only things standing between innocent people and catastrophic harm. But for now, on this particular Tuesday morning in Cleveland, Marcus Thompson was just a mechanic with dirty hands and a quiet demeanor, preparing for what he assumed would be another ordinary day of fixing other people's cars and maintaining his perfect cover. He had no way of knowing that by the end of the day his 6-year deception would be shattered forever, and the Delta Force operator he'd tried so hard to leave behind would be forced back into the light. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sign something was wrong came at 11:47 a.m. when the black SUVs arrived. Marcus was under the hood of a Chevy Silverado when he heard the distinctive sound of multiple vehicles moving in tactical formation, engines synchronized, spacing precise, the kind of coordination that spoke of professional training. His hands never paused in their work on the alternator, but every nerve in his body snapped to high alert. Through his peripheral vision, he counted 4 vehicles: Escalades, tinted windows, Ohio plates that his trained eye immediately recognized as government-issued despite their civilian appearance. They'd positioned themselves to block both entrances to Morrison's Auto Repair, a textbook containment maneuver that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Danny," he called quietly to the shop foreman who was arguing with a parts supplier on the phone, "we've got company." Danny Rodriguez glanced toward the front of the shop and shrugged. Probably just some businessman with car trouble. Rich guys always drive those boats. He went back to his phone call, completely missing the tactical significance of the vehicle's positioning. 8 men emerged from the SUVs, and Marcus's assessment became grimmer. They moved with the fluid coordination of a trained unit, but something was off. Their positioning was too aggressive for federal agents, too organized for criminals, too purposeful for corporate security. These weren't law enforcement officers conducting a routine operation. These were operators conducting a mission. The lead man entered Morrison's through the front office, and Marcus got his first clear look at the threat. Mid-40s, physically fit, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite conceal the shoulder holster beneath his left arm. His eyes swept the shop with a systematic scan of someone trained in close-quarters combat, cataloging exits, cover positions, and potential threats. Behind him came 3 more men, similarly dressed and armed. 2 remained by the entrance, while the other 2 moved to flank the main work area. Classic room clearing pattern, executed with military precision. "Gentlemen," the lead man announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I need everyone to remain calm and follow instructions. This is a matter of national security." Sarah Chen looked up from her desk, confusion replacing her usual cheerful expression. "I'm sorry, sir, but if this is some kind of official business, you'll need to show us proper identification and—" "Ma'am," another man interrupted, producing a badge that flashed too quickly for civilian eyes to read properly. "We're with a federal task force investigating terrorist activities. We need to secure this facility immediately." The word terrorist sent a ripple of fear through the small group of customers waiting in the reception area. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman whose Buick was getting an inspection, clutched her purse tighter. Jim Morrison, the shop owner, emerged from his office looking bewildered. "Action. Now hold on just a minute," Morrison said, his Cleveland accent thickening with stress. "This is a legitimate business. We've got nothing to do with any terrorists. Maybe you've got the wrong." "Mr. Morrison," the lead man said, somehow knowing the owner's name without introduction, "we have credible intelligence that this facility is being used as an operational base by a domestic terror cell. Everyone present needs to be processed for security clearance before we can proceed." Marcus continued working on the Silverado, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Everything about this situation was wrong. Real federal agents didn't announce terrorist investigations to civilians. They didn't secure auto repair shops with overwhelming force for paperwork violations. And they certainly didn't move with the kind of tactical precision he was observing. These weren't federal agents, they were something else entirely. "Processing will be conducted individually," the lead man continued, gesturing toward the shop's conference room. "We'll need to verify everyone's identity and association with this facility. This is a matter of national security, so cooperation is mandatory, not optional." One of the customers, a middle-aged businessman named Robert Hayes, whose BMW was getting brake work, stood up indignantly. "This is ridiculous. I'm just here to get my car fixed. I don't have time for some government fishing expedition." The response was swift and brutal. One of the armed men grabbed Hayes by the arm and forced him toward the conference room with unnecessary violence. "Sir, you need to comply with federal instructions. Resistance will be interpreted as suspicious behavior." The message was clear. This wasn't a request, it was a threat backed by force. Marcus processed the tactical situation with deadly calm. 8 hostiles, possibly more outside, armed and organized, but their aggressive posture suggested they weren't planning to maintain the federal agent charade for long. The systematic processing of individuals was likely preparation for something larger, hostage-taking, information extraction, or worse, His cover identity screamed at him to keep his head down, play the role of confused civilian, avoid drawing attention. But his Delta Force training was analyzing sightlines, counting ammunition, calculating response times for local law enforcement. Marcus Thompson, the lead man, called out, consulting a tablet that definitely hadn't been issued by any federal agency. Mechanic, please report to the conference room for processing. The fact that they knew his name, his cover name, sent ice through Marcus's veins. This wasn't random. These men had intelligence on everyone in the shop, which meant this operation had been planned specifically for Morrison's Auto Repair. But why? What could terrorists want with a small Cleveland auto shop? Marcus wiped his hands on a shop rag and walked toward the conference room, maintaining the slightly bewildered expression of a civilian caught up in something beyond his understanding. As he passed the lead man, he caught a glimpse of the tablet screen and his blood turned to ice. It wasn't a standard federal database interface. It was a target list, complete with photographs, names, and what looked like tactical assessments. His own photo was there, along with Sarah's, Danny's, and several regular customers, including Mrs. Patterson and Robert Hayes. This wasn't a terrorist investigation. Morrison's Auto Repair was the target. In the conference room, Marcus sat across from two of the armed men while maintaining his cover. They asked routine questions: name, address, how long he'd worked at Morrison's, his relationship with other employees. Standard information gathering that would be completely normal if conducted by actual federal agents. But Marcus noticed details that civilians would miss. The federal agents were using non-standard communication equipment. Their weapons were high-end civilian purchases, not government issue. Most tellingly, their tactical movements showed military training, but not American military training. The spacing was wrong, the hand signals were unfamiliar, the clearing patterns were foreign. These weren't federal agents, domestic terrorists, or even common criminals. These were foreign operators conducting a mission on American soil, using Morrison's Auto Repair as either a target or a cover for something much larger. When the interview ended, Marcus was escorted back to the main shop area where the situation had deteriorated further. The customers were now separated from the employees, with armed guards watching both groups. The front windows had been covered with newspaper, blocking the view from outside. Most ominously, one of the operators was setting up what looked like sophisticated communication equipment in Sarah's office. Whatever these men were planning, Morrison's Auto Repair was just the beginning. Danny Rodriguez caught Marcus's eye and mouthed a single word. "Police?" Marcus gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. These operators were too professional to have missed standard security protocols. If local law enforcement hadn't already responded to the suspicious activity, it meant the threat assessment was even worse than he'd initially calculated. The lead man finished his preparations and addressed the group with the cold efficiency of someone delivering a briefing rather than instructions to civilians. "Ladies and gentlemen, this facility is now under federal security protocols. For your safety and the success of this operation, you will remain here until further notice. Anyone attempting to leave or contact outside parties will be considered a security threat and dealt with accordingly." Mrs. Patterson began crying quietly. Robert Hayes demanded to call his lawyer. Sarah Chen stared in shock at the transformation of her peaceful workplace into what was clearly a hostage situation disguised as a federal operation. Marcus Thompson, auto mechanic, would have been terrified. But Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, Delta Force operator, was calculating kill zones and preparing for war. The impossible challenge had arrived at Morrison's Auto Repair, and Marcus realized that his 6 years of careful deception were about to be put to the ultimate test. Whatever these men were planning, innocent people were going to die unless someone with very specific skills decided to stop them. The question wasn't whether Marcus could maintain his cover anymore. The question was whether he could live with himself if he did. Detective Ray Kowalski of Cleveland PD's tactical unit was having the worst day of his 15-year career when the call came in at 12:23 p.m. "Possible hostage situation at Morrison's Auto Repair on East 55th, dispatch crackled through his radio. Anonymous tip reported suspicious activity in blocked exits. SWAT team is 40 minutes out due to training exercise in Akron." Kowalski cursed under his breath as he turned his patrol car toward downtown Cleveland. Morrison's was in his sector, a quiet shop that had never caused problems in the 6 years he'd been patrolling this beat. Jim Morrison was a decent guy who employed local kids and fixed cars for half the neighborhood. Whatever was happening there shouldn't require SWAT intervention. But when Kowalski arrived at the scene, his assessment changed immediately. 4 black SUVs formed a perfect perimeter around the building. No civilian vehicles had that kind of coordination. The shop's windows were covered from inside, and he couldn't see any movement through the main entrance. Most tellingly, there were no signs of normal business activity. No customers coming or going. No mechanics moving cars in the lot. Kowalski called for backup and tried the direct approach. He parked 50 yards away and used his loudspeaker. "This is Cleveland Police Department. We need to speak with whoever's in charge inside Morrison's Auto Repair. Please send a representative to the front entrance to discuss the situation." The response came 5 minutes later when the shop's front door opened. A well-dressed man emerged, hands visible, carrying what appeared to be federal credentials. "Officer," the man called out, his voice carrying authority, "Agent William Crawford, FBI Counterterrorism Task Force. We're conducting a classified operation related to domestic terror threats. Your presence is compromising operational security." Kowalski approached cautiously, his training screaming warnings that something felt wrong. "Agent Crawford, I need to verify your identity and get briefed on the situation. We've got reports of suspicious activity." Crawford produced a badge and identification that looked legitimate at first glance. "Officer, I understand your concern, but this is a federal matter involving classified intelligence. We're tracking a terror cell that's been using this facility as a meeting point. The situation is contained, and we'll be concluding operations within the hour." Every instinct Kowalski had developed in 15 years of police work told him this was wrong. Federal agents didn't conduct operations without coordinating with local law enforcement. They didn't block civilian businesses without proper notifications. And they certainly didn't get defensive when local cops tried to verify their activities. "Agent Crawford, I'm going to need to call this in to my supervisor and get confirmation from FBI headquarters. Standard protocol for joint operations." Crawford's expression hardened slightly. "Officer, operational security requires that we minimize communications during active phases. I can have your supervisor contacted through proper federal channels after we conclude here." It was exactly the wrong answer. Real federal agents welcomed verification because it protected their operations. Only people with something to hide discouraged official communication. Kowalski stepped back toward his patrol car. "Sir, I'm going to need you to wait here while I make some calls. Don't go back inside until I've verified the situation." "Officer Kowalski," Crawford said, somehow knowing his name, "I strongly advise you to return to normal patrol duties. Federal operations supersede local law enforcement jurisdiction." The fact that Crawford knew his name without introduction sealed it. These weren't federal agents. Back in his patrol car, Kowalski immediately called FBI Cleveland Field Office. The response was definitive. No federal operations were scheduled in his sector. No Agent William Crawford was on active duty in Ohio, and no counterterrorism task forces were operating in downtown Cleveland. Kowalski requested immediate SWAT response and called his supervisor, Sergeant Michael Torres, a 20-year veteran who'd handled everything from bank robberies to domestic terrorism cases. "Ray, what's your assessment?" Torres asked, when he arrived 20 minutes later with additional patrol units. "Sergeant, we've got foreign operators conducting some kind of operation using federal cover. At least 8 hostiles, professional-grade equipment, and they've got civilians inside. This is way above our capability level." Torres studied the scene through binoculars, noting the tactical positioning of the vehicles and the complete lack of normal business activity. "SWAT's still 30 minutes out. FBI's sending a response team, but they're coming from Columbus. We're looking at an hour before we have proper tactical support." That's when Captain Lisa Rodriguez of Cleveland SWAT arrived, having cut short the Akron training exercise when she heard the situation report. Rodriguez was a former Army Ranger with 2 tours in Afghanistan and the most experienced tactical commander on Cleveland's force. She surveyed the scene and delivered her assessment with brutal honesty. "Gentlemen, this is a no-win scenario for conventional law enforcement. We're looking at professional operators who've had time to prepare defensive positions. They've got civilian hostages, unknown weapons, and possible explosive devices. Even with full SWAT deployment, we're talking about significant casualties among the hostages. Detective Kowalski felt his stomach drop. "Captain, there are at least 12 civilians in there, regular people who were just getting their cars fixed." Rodriguez nodded grimly, which is exactly why this is impossible. Standard tactical doctrine requires containing the threat and waiting for specialized federal response teams. These aren't bank robbers or domestic terrorists. These are military-trained operators conducting a planned mission. Our equipment and training aren't designed for this level of threat. Sergeant Torres joined the conversation. "How long until federal tactical teams arrive?" "FBI hostage rescue team is deploying from Quantico, minimum 4 hours. Delta Force counterterrorism unit could be here in 6 hours if this gets classified as domestic terrorism with foreign involvement." The mathematics were stark. 12 innocent civilians held by professional operators for potentially 6 hours. Whatever the terrorists' timeline was, it almost certainly didn't allow for extended negotiations. "What about negotiation?" Kowalski asked, grasping for alternatives. Captain Rodriguez shook her head. "Ray, professional operators don't take hostages for negotiation. They take them for operational security. These people aren't looking to make a deal. They're buying time to complete whatever mission brought them here." The radio crackled with an update from dispatch. "All units, be advised that similar situations are being reported in Detroit, Milwaukee, and Pittsburgh. FBI is treating this as coordinated domestic terrorism with possible foreign state involvement." The scope of the threat suddenly became clear. Morrison's Auto Repair wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger coordinated attack on American soil. "Jesus," Torres muttered. "This is the real thing." Rodriguez was already calculating tactical options and finding none acceptable. Conventional assault would result in massive civilian casualties. Siege tactics might work if we had days, but coordinated attacks suggest these operators are working on a compressed timeline. Negotiation isn't viable with professionals who've already demonstrated they're willing to impersonate federal agents. A new voice joined the conversation as FBI agent Patricia Walsh arrived from the Cleveland field office. Walsh was a 15-year veteran of federal law enforcement with extensive experience in counterterrorism operations. "Local assets are not equipped to handle this threat level," Walsh announced after receiving her briefing. "We're looking at military-trained foreign operators conducting coordinated attacks on American infrastructure. This requires specialized federal response capabilities that are currently hours away." Detective Kowalski looked at the auto repair shop where 12 innocent people were being held by professional killers, knowing that every agency and expert was telling him the same thing: wait for someone else to handle it. "So what do we do?" he asked. "Just set up a perimeter and hope these terrorists don't start executing hostages?" Agent Walsh's expression was grim. "Detective, sometimes the hardest part of law enforcement is accepting that some situations are beyond our capabilities. We contain, we evacuate surrounding areas, and we wait for assets that can handle this threat level without getting everyone killed." Captain Rodriguez added the final crushing detail. "Ray, even if federal tactical teams were here right now, this would be considered an extremely high-risk operation. Professional operators with prepared positions and civilian shields are the worst-case scenario for any tactical response." As if to emphasize the point, one of the shop's windows opened briefly, and a weapon barrel was visible for just a moment, long enough for the police observers to see that the terrorists were armed with military-grade assault rifles. "Automatic weapons," Rodriguez noted. "Professional-grade equipment. These aren't improvised terrorists. They're military operators conducting a mission." The message was clear. Every qualified expert who'd assessed the situation had reached the same conclusion. Rescuing the hostages at Morrison's Auto Repair was impossible with available resources. The best they could do was contain the situation and wait for help that might arrive too late. Inside the shop, 12 innocent people were depending on rescue that every expert agreed was beyond their capabilities. But sometimes the most dangerous situations require solutions that experts consider impossible. Sometimes they require someone who refuses to accept that innocent people should die while help is en route. Sometimes they require someone whose capabilities have been hidden so well that the experts don't even know he exists. Inside Morrison's Auto Repair, the atmosphere had shifted from confusion to controlled terror. The initial deception about federal agents had been abandoned entirely. The hostages now understood they were prisoners of armed men, whose intentions remained chillingly unclear. Marcus watched from his position near the service bay as the leader, who'd called himself Agent Crawford, coordinated with his team using rapid-fire communications in what sounded like Eastern European languages. Whatever operation these men were conducting, Morrison's was clearly just one piece of a larger puzzle. The tactical situation had deteriorated steadily over the past hour. 2 more vehicles had arrived, bringing the total hostile count to 12. The shop's layout, which Marcus knew intimately, was being systematically fortified. Windows were blocked, defensive positions established, and escape routes secured with professional efficiency. But it was the equipment being unloaded from the new vehicles that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Jesus Christ," Danny Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible. "What the hell is that thing?" Through the service bay, Marcus could see men assembling what appeared to be sophisticated electronic equipment. Not weapons, but something potentially more dangerous. Satellite communication arrays, computer terminals, and devices that looked like they belonged in a military command center rather than a Cleveland auto shop. Sarah Chen sat with the other civilian hostages, her face pale but determined. She'd been quietly trying to keep Mrs. Patterson calm while watching the terrorists' activities with the sharp intelligence that had made her an excellent office manager. When she caught Marcus's eye, she mouthed a single word: "Why?" It was the same question eating at Marcus. Why Morrison's? Why this particular auto shop in this particular neighborhood? What could foreign operators possibly want with a small business that fixed brake pads and changed oil filters? The answer began to emerge when Crawford received a communication through his earpiece and smiled with cold satisfaction. "Gentlemen," he announced to his team, switching back to accented English, "Phase 1 is complete in all 4 cities. We now proceed to Phase 2. Bring up the communications array and establish satellite links." One of the operators approached Crawford with a tablet displaying what looked like building schematics. "Sir, the target infrastructure is mapped and confirmed. Underground utility access is exactly as intelligence indicated." Marcus felt pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. Morrison's Auto Repair sat directly above a major junction of Cleveland's telecommunications infrastructure. The building's basement housed junction boxes for internet, phone, and emergency services communication throughout the downtown area. What looked like a random auto shop was actually positioned at a critical node of the city's digital nervous system. This wasn't a hostage situation at all. It was a cyber warfare operation using civilian shields to buy time for system infiltration. "Danny," Marcus whispered to the shop foreman, "how long have we been sitting on top of those utility lines?" Rodriguez looked confused. "What utility lines?" "I mean, there's some city stuff in the basement, but Morrison never paid attention to that. Just some junction boxes and cables." Marcus closed his eyes, understanding the full scope of what they were facing. These operators hadn't chosen Morrison's randomly. They'd selected it specifically because it provided access to Cleveland's critical communications infrastructure while appearing completely innocuous. A cyber attack launched from a legitimate business would be nearly impossible to trace or stop. The hostages weren't just human shields. They were cover for an operation that could cripple communications across the entire region. That's when the shop's landline phone rang. Crawford gestured to one of his men, who answered with practiced authority: "Morrison's Auto Repair." The voice on the other end was loud enough for several people to hear. "This is Captain Rodriguez with Cleveland Police SWAT. We need to speak with whoever's in charge of the situation inside." Crawford took the phone with a slight smile. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Agent William Crawford, FBI Counterterrorism Task Force. As I've explained to your officers, this is a federal operation involving classified national security matters. We require you to maintain your perimeter and avoid interference." "Agent Crawford, we verified with FBI headquarters that no such operation is authorized. We know you're not federal agents. We're prepared to negotiate for the safe release of all hostages." The pretense was finally dropping. Crawford's expression hardened as he realized local law enforcement had identified his deception. "Captain, I'm afraid negotiations are not possible. We are conducting a time-sensitive operation that will conclude within the next 3 hours. Any interference will result in immediate termination of all civilian personnel present." It was a death sentence delivered with bureaucratic politeness. Crawford hung up and turned to address the hostages directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears local law enforcement has become unnecessarily involved in our operation. For your safety, I need everyone to understand that any attempt to escape or interfere will have fatal consequences." Mrs. Patterson began sobbing quietly. Robert Hayes, the businessman, looked like he was having trouble breathing. Sarah Chen reached over to squeeze the elderly woman's hand, her own fear barely contained. That's when Marcus made his decision. For 6 years, he'd hidden behind the persona of Marcus Thompson, quiet mechanic who kept his head down and avoided trouble. But 12 innocent people were about to die because foreign terrorists needed civilian shields for a cyber warfare operation against American infrastructure. The Delta Force oath he'd sworn 8 years ago was simple: to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath didn't have an expiration date. Marcus stood up slowly, his hands visible, his expression carefully neutral. "Excuse me," he said to Crawford, his voice carrying just enough confidence to draw attention without seeming threatening. "I think there might be a problem with your timeline." Crawford turned toward him with mild interest. "Mr. Thompson, isn't it? What kind of problem?" Marcus gestured toward the equipment being assembled in the service bay. "That communications gear you're setting up, it's not going to work properly in this building without some modifications to the electrical system. The power grid in this neighborhood is old, and you're going to get interference from the automotive equipment." It was a complete lie, delivered with the technical confidence of someone who'd spent 6 years being the best mechanic at Morrison's. Crawford studied him with new interest. "You have electrical expertise, Mr. Thompson?" 6 years of troubleshooting electrical problems in cars teaches you a lot about power systems and interference patterns," Marcus replied, staying perfectly in character. "I can help you avoid some technical problems that might delay your operation." One of Crawford's technical specialists approached and confirmed Marcus's assessment with a few quick instrument readings. "Sir, he's correct. We're getting significant electromagnetic interference from the equipment in here. It could affect our satellite uplinks." Crawford smiled coldly. "Mr. Thompson, it seems you may be useful after all. You will assist our technical team in resolving these electrical issues. Any attempt to sabotage our equipment will result in the immediate execution of your coworkers." Marcus nodded with the resigned compliance of a civilian forced into an impossible situation. "I understand. I just want everyone to get out of this safely." But as he walked toward the communications equipment, Marcus was conducting a completely different kind of assessment. Number of operators, weapons positioning, equipment vulnerabilities, sight lines, cover positions. The tactical mind he'd spent 6 years suppressing was fully operational again. Sarah Chen watched him go, confusion and something else, hope maybe, flickering in her eyes. She'd worked with Marcus for 3 years and had never seen him volunteer for anything beyond routine maintenance tasks. Something about his sudden willingness to help the terrorists felt wrong. Danny Rodriguez was thinking the same thing. Marcus had always been the guy who avoided attention, who did his job and went home. Stepping forward to help armed terrorists wasn't in character for the quiet mechanic they all knew. What none of them realized was that Marcus Thompson, auto mechanic, was stepping aside. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, Delta Force operator, was about to go to work. The impossible situation required an impossible solution, and the only person in Morrison's Auto Repair with the skills to provide one had just volunteered to get close enough to the enemy's critical equipment to make all the difference. Crawford had no way of knowing he'd just invited a ghost into his operation, a ghost with 8 years of training in exactly the kind of warfare he was about to face. The terrorist thought he'd found a useful civilian to help with technical problems. He'd actually just handed operational access to one of the most dangerous men in the American military. Marcus approached the terrorist communications array with the measured pace of a mechanic examining a complex problem, but his mind was operating on multiple levels that would have been impossible for a civilian to maintain. Surface level, Marcus Thompson, auto mechanic, nervous but trying to be helpful under duress. Tactical level, Staff Sergeant Thompson, Delta Force operator, conducting real-time intelligence gathering on enemy capabilities, weapons, positioning, and operational vulnerabilities. Strategic level, a soldier who understood that this cyber warfare operation could cripple emergency services across Cleveland, potentially costing hundreds of lives beyond the immediate hostages. Your main power distribution is running through circuits that weren't designed for this kind of load, Marcus told the terrorist technical specialist, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who spoke English with a slight accent. You're going to need to isolate some of the automotive equipment to prevent feedback interference. It was exactly the kind of technical detail that a good mechanic would know, delivered with just enough uncertainty to seem authentic. But while Marcus talked about electrical systems, he was memorizing the layout of the communications equipment with photographic precision. Satellite uplink array, military grade, probably Russian manufacture. Range approximately 500 miles, capable of bypassing standard telecommunications security protocols. Computer terminals, hardened field units running specialized software that looked designed for infrastructure penetration. Multiple screens showing what appeared to be network diagrams of Cleveland's utility systems. Encryption devices, civilian equipment that had been modified with components Marcus recognized from classified briefings. These weren't improvised terrorist tools. They were state-sponsored warfare assets. Duh, yes, this makes sense, the technical specialist agreed. Can you modify the electrical routing to provide clean power to our equipment? Marcus nodded, maintaining his helpful civilian demeanor while calculating the implications of what he was seeing. This wasn't just an attack on Cleveland. The equipment was sophisticated enough to simultaneously target multiple cities: Detroit, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh. A coordinated assault on Great Lakes region infrastructure that could paralyze communications for millions of people. I'll need to access the main electrical panel in the basement, Marcus said, and I'll need some basic tools from my kit. Crawford, who had been monitoring the conversation, nodded approval. Alexei will accompany you. Any deviation from electrical work will result in immediate consequences for your coworkers. The basement of Morrison's Auto Repair was cramped and dimly lit, filled with the accumulated detritus of 30 years in business. But Marcus knew every inch of the space, including details that hadn't been visible in any building schematic the terrorists might have obtained. Hidden behind a false wall that Jim Morrison had installed to store old records was a maintenance tunnel that connected to the utility access corridor running beneath East 55th Street. Marcus had discovered it 2 years ago during a routine inspection and had never mentioned it to anyone, a secret that was about to become tactically crucial. This electrical panel, Alexei said, examining the main distribution box, it provides power to entire building? Main power, yes, Marcus replied, opening his toolkit with practiced efficiency. But there are some redundant systems you probably didn't account for. Emergency backup power, separate circuits for the telecommunications equipment in the walls. As Marcus worked, he began implementing a plan that existed on 3 simultaneous levels. Level 1. Genuine electrical modifications that would actually improve power distribution to the terrorist equipment, maintaining his cover as a helpful civilian. Level 2. Subtle sabotage that would create cascading system failures in the communications array, but not until after a predetermined delay, long enough to avoid immediate detection. Level 3. Preparation of the basement infrastructure for a tactical assault that only someone with his specific training could execute. You know much about electrical systems for auto mechanic, Alexei observed, watching Marcus work with obvious expertise. Marcus shrugged, staying in character. 6 years fixing car electronics teaches you about power distribution, circuit protection, interference patterns. Most mechanics these days need to be half electrician just to diagnose modern vehicles. It was a perfectly plausible explanation that masked the real source of Marcus's electrical expertise, cross-training in demolitions and field-expedient device construction that was standard for Delta Force operators. While rewiring circuits, Marcus was simultaneously preparing what military personnel called infrastructure denial capabilities. If the situation deteriorated beyond rescue possibilities, he needed to ensure the terrorists couldn't complete their cyber warfare mission even if they killed all the hostages. How long for these modifications? Alexei asked. About 20 minutes for the basic routing, Marcus replied. But I'd recommend testing each circuit individually to avoid system-wide failures. You don't want your equipment shutting down in the middle of whatever you're trying to accomplish. Above them, Marcus could hear the terrorists coordinating their operation with increasing urgency. Radio chatter suggested the simultaneous attacks in other cities were proceeding on schedule, with Cleveland's operation being the most critical, due to its central position in Great Lakes communications infrastructure. That's when Marcus heard something that changed everything, Sarah Chen's voice, raised in apparent panic. "Mrs. Patterson needs medical attention. I think she's having a heart attack." The elderly woman's distress was genuine. The stress of the hostage situation had triggered a cardiac episode that required immediate intervention. But Sarah's timing suggested something more calculated. She was creating a medical emergency that would require terrorist attention and potentially expose their operational security. Marcus realized that Sarah Chen, office manager, was conducting her own resistance operation using the tools available to a civilian. Medical crises that couldn't be ignored without risking the death of a hostage they needed alive. "Alexei," Crawford's voice came through the terrorist's radio. "We have medical situation upstairs. How long for electrical modifications?" "Maybe 15 minutes more," Alexei replied, looking at Marcus for confirmation. Marcus nodded, but his mind was racing through tactical calculations. Sarah's medical emergency was providing an unexpected opportunity, but it also accelerated his timeline significantly. If Mrs. Patterson's condition deteriorated, the terrorists might decide that maintaining 12 hostages was more trouble than it was worth. "Actually," Marcus said, making a crucial decision, "I can finish this faster if I work alone. The electrical routing is straightforward, but having someone looking over my shoulder makes me nervous about making mistakes." Alexei hesitated. "I have orders to maintain direct supervision." "Look," Marcus said, injecting just the right amount of civilian anxiety into his voice, "I'm trying to help you guys complete your operation without anyone getting hurt. But if I mess up the electrical work because I'm nervous, your equipment fails, and everyone upstairs dies for nothing. 5 minutes alone to finish the wiring, then you can inspect everything before we power it up." The logic was sound from a terrorist operational perspective. Alexei needed the electrical work completed correctly, and a nervous civilian working under direct supervision was more likely to make critical errors. 5 minutes, Alexei agreed. Any deviation from electrical work will be immediately detected. He climbed back upstairs, leaving Marcus alone in the basement for the first time since the operation began. The transformation was immediate and complete. Marcus Thompson, nervous civilian, disappeared entirely. Staff Sergeant Thompson, Delta Force operator, went to work with lethal precision. First, he completed the electrical modifications exactly as promised, ensuring the terrorist equipment would function normally for the next 30 minutes before experiencing cascading failures that would appear to be random system malfunctions. Second, he accessed the hidden maintenance tunnel and conducted rapid reconnaissance of the utility corridor, confirming that it provided tactical access to positions that weren't covered by terrorist security. Third, he improvised field-expedient devices using materials available in Morrison's basement, automotive chemicals, electrical components, and metal fabrication tools that could be weaponized by someone with the right training. Fourth, he established emergency communication with the outside using the building's hardwired alarm system, transmitting a brief tactical assessment in military code that would be meaningless to civilian responders but crucial to any federal tactical teams monitoring the situation. The message was simple: infrastructure denial prepared, tactical entry possible through utility access. Recommend immediate federal response with cyber warfare specialists. When Alexei returned after exactly 5 minutes, he found Marcus putting away his tools with the satisfied expression of a mechanic who'd solved a complex problem. "Electrical modifications complete," Marcus reported. "Your equipment should have clean, stable power for extended operations." What Alexei couldn't have known was that he was looking at a man who had just prepared the battlefield for an asymmetric warfare engagement that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. The impossible situation was about to meet an impossible solution, implemented by someone whose capabilities had been hidden so perfectly that the enemy had invited him to sabotage their own operation. In 10 minutes, the delayed electrical failures would begin. In 15 minutes, federal tactical teams would receive intelligence that would change their entire assessment of the situation. But first, Marcus had to get back upstairs and continue playing the role of helpful civilian, while 12 innocent people depended on his ability to wage a one-man war against professional terrorists. The real battle was about to begin. Marcus emerged from the basement to find the situation upstairs had deteriorated into barely controlled chaos. Mrs. Patterson was unconscious on the waiting room floor, her breathing shallow and irregular. Sarah Chen knelt beside her, performing CPR with the competent precision of someone who'd taken emergency medical training seriously. "She needs a hospital immediately," Sarah said, looking up at Crawford with desperate authority. "This isn't stress or panic. She's having a massive coronary event. Without medical intervention in the next few minutes, she's going to die." Crawford studied the unconscious woman with cold calculation. A dead hostage complicated his operational security, but moving hostages to accommodate medical emergencies created even bigger problems. "Continue your medical assistance," he told Sarah curtly. "The operation will conclude within 1 hour. Medical transportation can be arranged at that time." It was a death sentence delivered with bureaucratic efficiency, and everyone in the room understood it. Danny Rodriguez exploded with rage. "You son of a bitch! She's 73 years old. She's got grandchildren. You can't just let her die." Two terrorists immediately trained their weapons on Danny, but Crawford held up a hand to stop them. "Mr. Rodriguez, emotional outbursts will not change operational realities. Your employer's customer chose an unfortunate time to require automotive services." That's when Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Crawford was receiving constant updates through his earpiece, and each communication was making him more agitated. The cyber warfare operation wasn't proceeding as smoothly as planned. "Sir," one of the technical specialists approached Crawford with obvious concern, "we're getting interference patterns in the satellite uplink that weren't present during initial testing. The electrical modifications may have created unexpected complications." Marcus maintained his expression of helpful civilian concern while internally calculating the timeline of his sabotage. The cascading electrical failures weren't supposed to begin for another 20 minutes, but the terrorist equipment was more sensitive to power fluctuations than he'd anticipated. "Can the interference be corrected?" Crawford asked sharply. "Possibly, but it will require additional time and potentially moving some equipment to different locations within the building." Crawford's jaw tightened with frustration. Outside, they could hear the sound of additional vehicles arriving. Federal tactical teams were staging for what everyone assumed would be a prolonged siege operation. That's when everything changed. The first explosion came from the direction of Detroit. Crawford's earpiece crackled with urgent communications in rapid-fire Eastern European languages. From the fragments Marcus could understand, the Detroit operation had suffered catastrophic failure, not from law enforcement intervention, but from what sounded like systematic sabotage of their cyber warfare equipment. "How is this possible?" Crawford demanded of his technical team. Infrastructure penetration was confirmed across all target cities. The second explosion, this one closer from the direction of downtown Cleveland, sent a vibration through Morrison's Auto Repair that rattled the windows. Crawford's expression shifted from confident control to dangerous desperation. "Sir," one of his communication specialists reported, "we're receiving reports of coordinated equipment failures across all operational sites. The cyber warfare penetration is failing simultaneously in multiple cities." Marcus realized what was happening with crystalline clarity. His emergency communication from the basement hadn't just alerted federal tactical teams. It had provided cyber warfare specialists with real-time intelligence about the attack methodology. Federal forces were conducting coordinated infrastructure denial operations across all target cities simultaneously. The terrorists' carefully planned operation was collapsing in real time. "Sir," the technical specialist continued with obvious panic, "federal cyber warfare units are actively countering our network penetration. They appear to have advanced knowledge of our operational methodology." Crawford's eyes swept the room, looking for explanations, looking for someone to blame. His gaze stopped on Marcus with sudden, terrible suspicion. "Mr. Thompson," Crawford said quietly, "perhaps you could explain how federal forces obtained detailed intelligence about our operational capabilities." Marcus maintained his expression of confused civilian terror. "I don't understand what you're talking about. I just fixed your electrical problems like you asked." But Crawford was studying him with the focused attention of a professional intelligence operative who just realized he might have been deceived. "Your electrical modifications. Show me exactly what you changed." It was the moment Marcus had been preparing for since he'd volunteered to help with the terrorist equipment. The moment when maintaining his cover became impossible, when the choice was between continuing the deception and saving 12 innocent lives. Marcus looked around the room at the people who'd been his co-workers and friends for 6 years. Danny Rodriguez, who'd taught him how Morrisons liked their paperwork filled out. Sarah Chen, who'd tried to get him to join the office birthday celebrations and never pushed when he declined. Mrs. Patterson, unconscious and dying because she'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jim Morrison himself, the shop owner who'd given Marcus a job when he'd needed a new life and never asked questions about his past. All of them were going to die because professional terrorists had chosen their workplace as a cover for warfare against American infrastructure. Marcus made his choice. "Crawford," he said, his voice dropping into the command tone he hadn't used in 6 years. "The electrical modifications I made will cause cascading system failures in your communications array in approximately 12 minutes. The emergency communication I transmitted from the basement has provided federal cyber warfare specialists with complete intelligence on your operational methodology, and the field expedient devices I've prepared in this building will ensure that even if you kill all the hostages, your mission will fail completely." The transformation was immediate and shocking. Marcus Thompson, nervous civilian, disappeared entirely. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, Delta Force operator, stood in his place with the calm authority of someone who'd conducted similar operations in hostile territory around the world. Crawford's eyes widened with recognition and rage. "You're military." "Delta Force," Marcus confirmed. 8 years active duty, specialized in counterterrorism operations. "And you just made the mistake of conducting a military operation in my workplace." The room erupted into motion. Terrorists swung their weapons toward Marcus while the hostages scrambled for cover. But Marcus had been calculating this moment for over an hour, and he moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd trained for exactly this scenario. The first terrorist fell to an improvised weapon fashioned from automotive tools, a pneumatic wrench modified with a steel rod that struck with lethal force. The second went down to a combination of motor oil creating a slip hazard and a perfectly placed blow that rendered him unconscious in seconds. But there were 10 more armed terrorists in Morrison's Auto Repair, and Marcus was operating in a confined space filled with innocent civilians who could be caught in crossfire. Crawford shouted orders in multiple languages while training his own weapon on Sarah Chen. "Stand down immediately or I will execute all hostages." Marcus froze, his tactical assessment complete. He could neutralize Crawford, but not before the other terrorists killed everyone in the room. The mathematics of the situation were brutally clear. Attempting to continue his assault would result in the deaths of everyone he was trying to save. "You have 30 seconds to surrender," Crawford continued, "or I will demonstrate the consequences of deception." That's when the building's lights went out. The electrical failures Marcus had programmed into the terrorist communications equipment had cascaded into the building's main power systems, plunging Morrison's Auto Repair into complete darkness. In the absolute blackness, Marcus Thompson the mechanic ceased to exist entirely. Staff Sergeant Thompson, Delta Force operator, went to work with lethal efficiency in an environment where his training provided overwhelming tactical advantage. Night vision capabilities honed through years of operations in hostile territory, sound discipline that allowed him to move silently through familiar terrain. Combat reflexes trained to respond instantly to threats identified by non-visual cues. The terrorists had sophisticated equipment and professional training, but they were operating in an environment that Marcus knew intimately while he possessed capabilities they couldn't have anticipated. The critical moment had arrived, and it belonged entirely to a man who'd spent 6 years pretending to be someone he wasn't. The war for Morrison's Auto Repair was about to begin in earnest. In the absolute darkness of Morrison's Auto Repair, Marcus Thompson became a ghost. The terrorists' night vision equipment was sophisticated but unfamiliar. They were operating in a building they'd studied from blueprints but had never navigated in complete blackness. Marcus had walked these floors for 6 years, knew every tool placement, every obstacle, every acoustic signature of movement through the space. The first terrorist fell without understanding what had happened. One moment he was scanning the darkness with infrared optics. The next he was unconscious from a precisely applied blood choke that rendered him silent and motionless in under 8 seconds. Crawford's voice cut through the darkness with desperate authority. "Maintain positions. He's just one man in a confined space. Use your training." But their training was designed for open terrain combat, not close quarters battle in an environment controlled by their opponent. Marcus moved through Morrison's like he was part of the building itself, using acoustic shadows and familiar pathways to remain undetectable. The second terrorist discovered why Delta Force operators were considered the most dangerous soldiers in the American military. His infrared scope picked up movement near the hydraulic lift, but by the time he could acquire a target, Marcus had already flanked his position. The terrorist's weapon clattered to the floor along with its owner, both neutralized with surgical precision. "Sarah," Marcus called out in the darkness, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone in complete control of the tactical situation. "Take Mrs. Patterson and the other civilians to the office. Stay low, move along the east wall, avoid the center of the building." Sarah Chen's voice came back steady despite the terror of the situation. "Marcus, what the hell is happening?" "I'm ending this," Marcus replied, already moving toward his next target. "Just keep everyone away from the service bay. That's where this is going to get ugly." Crawford was coordinating his remaining men using whispered communications in multiple languages, trying to establish overlapping fields of fire that would deny Marcus freedom of movement. But he was thinking like a conventional military commander, not understanding that he was facing someone trained in asymmetric warfare. The third and fourth terrorists went down simultaneously when Marcus used the building's compressed air system to create a distraction while executing a two-target engagement that would have been impossible for anyone without years of specialized training. The pneumatic tools that had been Marcus's daily instruments for 6 years became precision weapons in the hands of someone who understood mechanical leverage and kinetic energy transfer. "5 down," Marcus announced to the darkness, his voice eerily calm. 7 to go. Crawford, you still have time to surrender and save your remaining men." The response came in the form of automatic weapons fire that lit up the darkness with muzzle flashes, revealing terrorist positions while potentially hitting innocent civilians. Marcus's tactical assessment shifted immediately. The terrorists were abandoning professional discipline in favor of volume fire, which made them more dangerous to the hostages but easier to locate and neutralize. "Danny, Sarah, everyone, stay down," Marcus called out. "This is about to get loud." What followed was a masterclass in close-quarters combat that would be dissected by military tacticians for years to come. Marcus used the building's automotive equipment as force multipliers, turning hydraulic systems into weapons platforms and electrical circuits into area denial devices. A terrorist attempting to flank through the service bay found himself caught in an improvised trap involving a hydraulic lift and several hundred pounds of automotive parts. Another terrorist, trying to use night vision to acquire Marcus through the parts storage area, discovered that 6 years of organizing inventory had given Marcus perfect knowledge of sightlines and cover positions. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds and ended with one less threat in the building. Crawford was beginning to understand the magnitude of his tactical error. "All units, this is not a civilian target. We are engaged with Special Operations personnel. Implement Protocol 7 immediately." Protocol 7, from what Marcus could determine from the radio chatter, involved using the hostages as human shields while conducting a fighting withdrawal to the basement communications equipment. It was a desperate move that confirmed Crawford's operation was failing catastrophically. But Crawford had underestimated both Marcus's capabilities and his intimate knowledge of Morrison's layout. The remaining terrorists began herding the civilian hostages toward the basement stairs, using them as cover while maintaining defensive positions. It was a tactically sound move that should have checkmated any rescue attempt. Instead, Marcus used the hidden maintenance tunnel he'd discovered years earlier. While the terrorists focused on the main floor, Marcus emerged from the basement utility corridor directly behind their communications equipment. The sophisticated cyber warfare array that had been designed to cripple Cleveland's infrastructure became the focal point of a close-quarters engagement between a Delta Force operator and 3 professional terrorists in a space barely 10 feet square. The fight was brutal, desperate, and decisive. Marcus's hand-to-hand combat training, honed through years of operations where silence was survival, proved superior to the terrorists' conventional weapons training in confined spaces. Within 90 seconds, the basement was secure, and the cyber warfare equipment was permanently disabled. Crawford's voice over the radio was frantic. "Basement team, report! Alexei, respond immediately!" The silence from below told Crawford everything he needed to know about the status of his operation. Above ground, the remaining 4 terrorists, including Crawford, were now trapped in a building controlled by someone who just demonstrated capabilities they hadn't anticipated. Their cyber warfare mission was compromised, their equipment was destroyed, and their tactical situation had deteriorated from operational control to survival mode. That's when the building's emergency lighting system activated. Marcus had programmed the backup power to restore minimal lighting after a 30-minute delay, giving him tactical advantage during the darkness phase, while providing enough visibility for the final phase of the operation. In the dim red glow of emergency lighting, the remaining terrorists could see the full scope of their tactical disaster. 7 of their team were down. Their primary mission equipment was destroyed. Their hostages were secured in defensive positions that provided them cover while denying the terrorists effective human shields. And Marcus Thompson stood in the center of Morrison's Auto Repair like an avenging angel, covered in oil and dust but completely uninjured, holding weapons taken from neutralized terrorists. "Crawford," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who just won an impossible battle, "your operation is over. Your cyber warfare equipment is destroyed. Your team is neutralized. Federal tactical teams are staged outside with complete intelligence on your remaining capabilities." Crawford emerged from behind an overturned desk, his weapon trained on Marcus, but his expression showing the desperate calculation of a professional who just watched his entire operation collapse. "You are one man," Crawford said, his accent thicker under stress. "I still have hostages. I still have operational capabilities." Marcus smiled with the cold confidence of someone who'd conducted similar operations on 3 continents. "Crawford, you're thinking like this is still a hostage situation. It's not. This is a combat zone and you just lost." The proof came 30 seconds later when federal tactical teams breached Morrison's Auto Repair from 4 different directions simultaneously, moving with the precision of units that had been provided with complete intelligence on the building layout, threat positions, and hostage locations. The remaining terrorists surrendered without resistance when faced with overwhelming professional force backed by someone who'd already demonstrated the futility of continued combat. Crawford himself was taken into custody while staring at Marcus with a mixture of professional respect and complete bewilderment. "Who are you?" he asked as federal agents secured his weapons. Marcus looked around at Morrison's Auto Repair, his workplace for 6 years, now a combat zone that would be investigated by multiple federal agencies. At his coworkers, who were staring at him like they'd never seen him before. At the evidence of a battle that had just saved thousands of lives by preventing a coordinated cyber warfare attack on American infrastructure. "I'm a mechanic," Marcus said simply. "I fix things when they're broken." But everyone in Morrison's Auto Repair, federal agents, rescued hostages, and neutralized terrorists alike, understood that they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. A man who'd hidden his true capabilities for 6 years had just conducted a single-handed counter-terrorism operation that would be studied in military academies as a textbook example of asymmetric warfare. The impossible had just been accomplished by someone whose greatest weapon had been the world's assumption that he was ordinary. Marcus Thompson, Delta Force operator, had saved the day. Marcus Thompson, auto mechanic, was about to face the consequences of no longer being invisible. Arknan. 3 hours after the last terrorist had been loaded into a federal transport vehicle, Marcus Thompson sat on the hood of a patrol car outside Morrison's Auto Repair, watching crime scene investigators document what the FBI was already calling the most successful single-operator counter-terrorism action in domestic law enforcement history. The quiet mechanic who'd arrived at work that morning no longer existed. Special Agent Patricia Walsh of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division approached with a thick folder and an expression that mixed professional respect with bureaucratic frustration. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," she began, then caught herself. "Sorry, Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss your situation." Marcus looked up from the cup of coffee someone had given him, his coveralls still stained with oil and the evidence of close-quarters combat. "What situation is that, Agent Walsh?" "The situation where a civilian auto mechanic just conducted a classified-level counter-terrorism operation using tactics and capabilities that are supposed to be known only to a handful of special operations personnel worldwide." Around them, the aftermath of the operation continued. Mrs. Patterson was being loaded into an ambulance, stable but requiring cardiac monitoring. Sarah Chen was giving her statement to federal investigators, occasionally glancing toward Marcus with an expression that suggested she was still processing the transformation she'd witnessed. Danny Rodriguez stood near the shop entrance, gesturing emphatically as he described the morning's events to a detective who was having obvious difficulty believing that the quiet mechanic Danny had worked with for 6 years had just neutralized an entire terrorist team. "My situation," Marcus said carefully, "is that I helped stop a terrorist attack that would have killed innocent people and crippled communications infrastructure across 4 cities. I thought that would be considered a good thing." Agent Walsh sat down on the hood beside him. Mr. Thompson, in the past 3 hours we've confirmed that the intelligence you provided from that basement communication prevented coordinated cyber warfare attacks in Detroit, Milwaukee, and Pittsburgh. Conservative estimates suggest you saved several thousand lives and prevented billions of dollars in infrastructure damage. Marcus nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But, Walsh continued, you also just demonstrated capabilities that raise significant national security questions. Delta Force training doesn't just disappear when someone gets discharged. The skills you use today, tactical assessment, close quarters combat, electronic sabotage, asymmetric warfare, those represent classified methodologies that could be extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. Agent Walsh, Marcus said quietly, I spent 8 years of my life serving this country in places that officially don't exist, fighting enemies whose names are classified above your clearance level. I didn't stop being a patriot when I became a civilian. I just wanted to live a normal life. And you've done that for 6 years, Walsh acknowledged. According to our investigation, Marcus Thompson, the auto mechanic, has been exemplary. No criminal activity, no suspicious associations, no behavior that would raise any red flags. You've been the perfect invisible civilian. Jim Morrison approached the conversation, his expression showing the bewilderment of a small business owner whose auto shop had just become a federal crime scene. Marcus, Morrison said, his voice carrying 6 years of friendship and genuine concern, these federal people are saying you used to be some kind of special forces soldier. Is that true? Marcus looked at his employer, the man who'd given him a job when he'd needed a fresh start, who'd never asked questions about his past, who trusted him with the keys to the business and treated him like family. He's awaited. It's true, Mr. Morrison. I should have told you, but I was trying to leave that life behind. I never expected it to follow me here. Morrison studied him for a long moment. 6 years, he said finally. 6 years you've been working for me, and I never knew I had a genuine American hero changing oil filters and fixing brake pads. I'm not a hero, Marcus replied. I'm just someone who couldn't stand by and watch innocent people get hurt. Sarah Chen finished her statement and walked over to join the conversation. Her face showed exhaustion, relief, and something else. A new understanding of the man she'd worked alongside for 3 years. Marcus, she said quietly, when you told Crawford you were Delta Force, when you changed, it was like watching a completely different person emerge. How long have you been carrying that inside? Marcus considered the question with the careful thought he'd given to everything in his civilian life. Since the day I walked into Morrison's 6 years ago, every morning I had to decide whether to be Marcus Thompson the mechanic or Staff Sergeant Thompson the soldier. Until today, I always chose the mechanic. Agent Walsh consulted her folder. Mr. Thompson, the federal government has a problem. You've just demonstrated that discharged special operations personnel can successfully conduct counterterrorism operations as civilians. That creates both opportunities and risks that we need to address. What kind of opportunities? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The kind where people with your capabilities could be extremely valuable in homeland security roles. Federal law enforcement agencies, counterterrorism task forces, specialized units that could benefit from your expertise. Danny Rodriguez, who'd been listening from a distance, approached the group with obvious agitation. Wait a minute. Are you people trying to recruit Marcus for some kind of government job? The man just saved all our lives, and you want to drag him back into whatever military stuff he was trying to escape? Walsh held up a hand diplomatically. Mr. Rodriguez, we're simply discussing options. Mr. Thompson has demonstrated capabilities that could serve the public good in various ways. Marcus stood up from the patrol car hood, his decision already made. Agent Walsh, I appreciate the offer, but I already have a job. Marcus, Morrison interjected. After what happened here today, I'm not sure Morrison's Auto Repair is going to be the same quiet place it used to be. This is going to bring attention, media coverage, federal oversight. Maybe a fresh start somewhere else would be better for everyone. Marcus looked around at the crime scene that had been his workplace, at the federal investigators documenting every detail of his counterterrorism operation, at the co-workers who would never see him the same way again. Mr. Morrison, he said finally, 6 years ago you gave me a job when I needed to disappear into a normal life. Today, that normal life saved 12 innocent people and prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed thousands. Maybe the lesson isn't that I need to disappear again. Maybe it's that sometimes ordinary people need to be ready for extraordinary situations. Sarah Chen smiled for the first time since the ordeal began. So you're staying? Marcus looked at Morrison's Auto Repair, damaged but still standing, like the life he'd built there. Someone needs to fix all this equipment that got damaged during the operation, and tomorrow, people are still going to need their cars repaired by someone they can trust. Agent Walsh closed her folder with obvious resignation. Mr. Thompson, if you change your mind about federal employment opportunities, you have my card. Agent Walsh, Marcus replied. If there's ever another situation like this one, you know where to find me. But until then, I'm just a mechanic who fixes things when they're broken. As the federal investigators finished their work and the crime scene tape came down, Marcus Thompson walked back into Morrison's Auto Repair. The building showed the scars of the morning's battle, but the hydraulic lift still worked, the tool benches were intact, and there were cars in the parking lot that needed attention. Danny Rodriguez followed him inside. Marcus, I've got to ask, are there any other mechanics in Cleveland who used to be elite military operators? Marcus smiled as he picked up a wrench and approached a Chevy Silverado that still needed its alternator replaced. Danny, the beauty of being invisible is that you never know who's hiding in plain sight. 3 weeks later, Morrison's Auto Repair reopened with enhanced security features that federal agencies had quietly installed. The customer base had grown significantly, partly from media attention, partly from federal employees who wanted their cars serviced by someone with Marcus's unique qualifications. Mrs. Patterson returned for her first oil change since the incident, bringing homemade cookies and a heartfelt thank you card signed by her entire family. Robert Hayes, the businessman who'd been taken hostage, became a regular customer and referred his entire company's fleet to Morrison's. Sarah Chen had been promoted to assistant manager and was helping coordinate the increased business that came with being the auto shop where the mechanic stopped a terrorist attack. But the most significant change was invisible to customers and federal investigators alike. Marcus Thompson still arrived every morning at 6:23 a.m., still performed meticulous maintenance on every vehicle, still kept to himself and avoided unnecessary attention. But now he wasn't hiding from his past, he was carrying it forward. In a small frame on his tool bench, next to the usual automotive manuals and work orders, was a commendation letter from the FBI recognizing his actions in preventing a coordinated terrorist attack on American infrastructure. Next to it was a simple brass nameplate that read, Marcus Thompson, Mechanic. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is exactly who you choose to be, whether the world recognizes it or not. And in Cleveland, Ohio, at Morrison's Auto Repair on East 55th Street, a Delta Force operator continued his mission of protecting innocent people, one brake pad replacement at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.